Hi, good to see everybody. I'm very excited to be here. It's my first Strange Loop, and so far it's been absolutely amazing. So I hope I can continue the trend and give you also a good lecture. A tiny warning, I guess, disclaimer. Usually when I talk about right to left in lectures, there's a side effect where people's brains start leaking out of their ears at some point. So in order to mitigate that a little bit, I added a couple of cute animal pictures. So bear with me, and hopefully we'll get through this. So welcome to Wait, It Does What? How supporting right to left can expose your bad UX decisions. So a little bit about me and why am I even talking about this. My name is Moriel Schottlender. I work at the Wikimedia Foundation at the Global Collaboration Team. And I am an avid enthusiast for right-to-left support. I also think in right-to-left. I speak Hebrew. And I'm an occasional answer in Stack Overflow. And the reason that I mention this is that a lot of the inspiration for this talk came from there. There's a lot of questions that I keep seeing popping up that are really interesting, good questions, but really are kind of like exposing probably problems with the UX in general, and not necessarily just with right-to-left support. And then that gave kind of like birth to the idea of this lecture. And also because Unicode last year started adding emoji into Unicode, I am also, oops, an emoji now, right? A little bit of the hair is missing, but with the smile. All right, so let's have a little bit of an introduction to languages and Wikipedia in general. So Wikipedia, if you don't know, is a pretty large website. We are the 5th largest, according to Alexa, in the global reach, which is pretty cool. What you might not be aware of is that we support 285 content Wikipedias. So just like we have English Wikipedia, we also have Hebrew and Spanish and 285 more. Please don't make me go over the list. And each Wikipedia is a unique community. So we don't have one website and then it's being translated endlessly and that's it. Each Wikipedia, each community has its own way of writing things, its own rules. And while people do tend to kind of like, translate from, a lot of times from English or from other big wikis, it's not a must. It's not an automatic translation that every Wikipedia is the same. So 285 content languages, but we also support 424 interface languages. And I'm going to touch about the difference between content and interface in a minute. But to those of you who are great with math, that gives us about 120,000 combinations of languages on the screen at any given time, depending on what the user wants, which is great. And as you can imagine, it also raises a bunch of issues, and we need to really deal with those. And this is a pretty unique problem. So this is from 2014, but it didn't change that much. So Wikipedia is all the way to the right with 285 languages. And you can see that the next up is Google with 145. It may have changed a little, but probably not doubled. And then we have Facebook with 53. We have Google Translate with 80. We support a lot of languages. We also have more than just Wikipedia. We have other projects that we're supporting. We have Wikimedia Commons that have images. We have WikiVoyage, WikiNews, WikiQuote. I always forget some of those when I talk about them, so I just put the image on the screen. Each one of those, or almost each one of those, also has almost 284 languages. So there's Wiktionary in English, Spanish, and Hebrew, et cetera, et cetera. So if you keep track of all of this, we eventually have about 900 websites that we keep track of. Not that many, sure. So with that said, let's go a little bit of an introduction of what is right to left. I don't know if you've all encountered this online or how deeply you've encountered, so we'll go very briefly, just what it is and why is that such a challenge. So this is the sentence we all know, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. We all use that to check out into fonts because it uses all of the alphabet. Great. When we read it from the left to the right, awesome. Well, this is the equivalent sentence in Hebrew. It literally says, a little bunny ate a little carrot that tasted like lettuce and enough. For some reason, that apparently includes all the letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Who knew? But as you can see from my hinting at aligning it to the right, the way that we read it is from the right to the left. OK, so we have text that we read from the left and text that we read from the right. Why is that so difficult? Well, it's actually difficult because it touches on more things than just typing and writing. It touches on something called a mental model. So if you think about it, really, here are an example of two Wikipedias. On the right is the Hebrew Wikipedia. It's right to left aligned. And on the left is the English Wikipedia. It's left to right. And you can see that the logo is mirrored. So on the Hebrew Wikipedia, it's on the right. On the English Wikipedia, it's on the left. The menu is also mirrored. English Wikipedia, it's on the left. Hebrew, it's on the right. Also, the tabs on the top, they're aligned right, left. Great. But really what this means is that beyond typing, the expectations of where things are supposed to be is different. The definition of where things start, where things end, are reversed. So as a Hebrew speaker, as a right-to-left user, my definition of beginning is on the right-hand side. So I would expect to see a logo on the right-hand side, because my eyes automatically go there, which is why the interface is flipped. So this is the main issue, really, with developing right-to-left languages. But it would have been so much easier if that's all we needed to do, just, mirror everything. Sure, if only. So let's see very briefly just about right-to-left in Wikipedia. So in Wikipedia, out of the 285 languages, we have 17 that are right-to-left Wikipedias. But as I kind of hinted at in the previous sentence, right-to-left is not exactly all right-to-left. We always have a little bit of left-to-right in there. And that is actually true also for the English Wikipedia, because if you have an entry about someone that was not born in an English-speaking country, they will have the same kind of thing, except their name will be in the other language, right? And if that is a person whose name is Farsi or Arabic or Hebrew, that will be right to left. So we do have mixes of stuff, and we have to deal with it. And all of this is also user-generated content. Our users create the content. We don't do that. So how do we deal with that? So this really raises a bunch of issues that are fun to deal with, I think. Not many agree with me, but I think they're really fun. And yeah, I'm going to let you consider that. So, dude, why do you talk backwards all the time? Backwards talking, I am not. English-centric view of grammar structures, you have. So keep that in mind. I would say that English speakers consider right to left backwards. We actually consider left to right backwards, but it depends who you ask, I guess. So there is one more introduction that I'm going to do. This one is where your brain might start leaking out of your ears, so bear with me. So Unicode is the system that we all use to type. Vast majority of all programs, and those that don't use it, please use it. Unicode bidirectional algorithm is an algorithm inside Unicode that dictates really what to do when you have two directionalities in a sentence, or in a general text, or etc. I highly recommend you read it. Sit when you do, with a cup of maybe hot chocolate or something. But highly recommend you read it. It looks a lot more daunting than it actually is, and I'm going to give you a couple of resources maybe to help you out. But here's a very, very quick introduction. So the bidirectional algorithm defines three entity types: strong, weak, and neutral. Now, this is an oversimplification. If anyone here deals with the bidirectional algorithm, I am oversimplifying. Don't kill me. I mean, it's just for the sake of clarity a little bit. So strong entities actually affect the directionality of all the entities around them. Weak ones do not affect, but they are affected by the directionality that the strong ones or the general context gave them. And the neutral ones that are just neutral, they don't do anything. What does that mean? Well, in the strong one, we have the alphabet, for the most part. Weak ones, we have punctuation and digits. And neutral, space, new line, tab, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as you can see, digits, it's with a little star next to it. I'm going to touch on that in a second. But let's look at an example. So here's a sentence in Hebrew. It's Albert Einstein was born in blah. And in the middle, there's the English name, or the German name, actually. So when we look at it from the bidirectional algorithm, this is what happens. We have right to left, and then we have a sentence that is left to right, and then we have another sentence that is right to left. The bidirectional algorithm knows that this is what's going on because the alphabet is a strong entity. And the parentheses, which are weak entities, just conform to their context. If you really want to cry, you can come to me after the lecture and I'll talk to you about parentheses, because there's a lot of problems with those. But for the most part, this is what happens, and this is useful for 99% of cases. Here's a little bit of a weird example, but that does happen. So here's a semi-sentence, I guess. Basically what I have here is the word Hebrew in Hebrew, and then the number 123. Now notice that I'm saying 123 and not 1, 2, 3, because you remember the little star over digits. There is a difference between separate digits and compound numbers. For the most part, in most right-to-left languages, not all, but most right-to-left languages, write numbers that internally are left to right. So when I write 123, I actually write 123 from the left to the right, even though it's inside a right-to-left sentence. And yes, when you learn math in school, it can produce a lot of issues. But this is how it looks like. OK, so we have a general sentence that is right to left. We said that numbers are weak, so they are being affected by the alphabet. Well, what would happen if I put my cursor between the 1 and the 2 and hit space? That will happen. All right. Huh. OK. Well, OK. And now I'm going to take my cursor and put it between the 2 and the 3. And now I'll hit space. You probably know where this is going, and you'll be right. That's what happens. Well, that looks completely ridiculous until you wait a minute and think about it for a second. So the entire context that I have here is right to left, right? And what do I have here? Well, in the first instance, I have 2 words, right to left, so word and then another word. In the second instance, I have 3 words already. I broke a word apart. And now 1, 2, 3. Makes sense. And in the fourth, I have 4 words, 1 word, second word, third word. So the fact that the initial instance, the second word, is internally left to right doesn't matter. Because once I broke that into 2 words, it's still right to left. All right? So once you look at this, suddenly it makes sense, even though it looked really weird when you didn't know what's going on. And it's OK, because it looks really weird to right-to-left users, even though they expect it. So here's another example, a little bit more complex this time. So I have a sentence going English, 1, 2, 3, this time with spaces. And then the word Hebrew, 1, 2, 3, and then English. Now let's say that I'm taking the word Hebrew, that is italicized here, and I'm switching it with the actual Hebrew word. What do you think will happen? This will happen. It's great, right? It's awesome. That makes no sense, except it does. Let's break it apart a little bit. So here we have it. English, the word in English for English is left to right. It's a strong right entity, so it dictated what the numbers are going to do. So we have English 1, 2, 3, all going left to right. But then we break it with Hebrew in Hebrew, which is right to left. Now the direction is right to left, and the numbers following are weak. They follow that direction from the right to the left, as expected. And then we break it again with the word English. So when you color code it, it looks really good and very understandable. When you don't, it looks really weird. So granted, usually we don't have that kind of a sentence, but we kind of can. So if you deal with, English, Hebrew, dates in between, things can look really weird and horrible. And we also have another thing called the general context. So if you are dealing with the web or with general interfaces and you have an input that has a context direction left to right or right to left, the general context of that input also affects things. So for example, look at the little period at the end here. That dot, that period, doesn't really know yet where it's supposed to be. It's punctuation. As far as it's concerned, the general context is the context of the input, which means that from the LTR, it's on the right, that's the end of the sentence. But if the direction is right to left, as far as it's concerned, the end of the sentence is towards the left. Now, if I continued that sentence after the period in English, then that period's context would have changed to be left to right, and then it would revert back to being on the correct side while I type, which is great when things move for you when you don't expect them. But this is going to be important for some of the examples that we're going to look at. So I told you that you should read the bidirectional algorithm. I created a little bit of an introduction to it on my website, and because it's mind-bending and has a lot of examples for you to try and like play around with. I added a lot of animated GIFs to help you along, so feel free. I think that these also will be shared online, but feel free to go and break your brain with more fascinating examples of what happens to right to left. So you might be saying, wait, but my product doesn't really need internationalization. Or people might be saying that. I really hope that people in this conference do not say that, because everybody needs internationalization. Here in Strangeloop, we see it. We need globalization and diversity and inclusiveness. Not to mention, it brings you a bigger market. But, and this is the point of this lecture, it also gets you a better code. It makes it generic, it makes it extendable, it's easier to manage, it's easier to think about, and it results with a better product. So really planning for right-to-left support itself makes your product a lot better. And it's really easier to expose bad UX decisions by just thinking about or trying to support things with right-to-left. So what does that mean? Well, let's go into some examples. So here's examples about how to name your product actions, or even your code actions. And I see this quite a lot. So here are a couple of like examples that I often see in software. So you have arrows left and right. You have pop-ups, like where do they align to the left edge of the button, or the right edge of the button, or the middle, or whatever. You have a pop-up, and then the pop-up has a little indicator on top of it. Do I put the indicator on the left? Do I put it on the right? Do I put it, where it is? And you see that a lot in many libraries, left, right, go that, go that. Well, when you switch it to right to left, it's really confusing. Wait, is it left, left, or is it left, but now when it's right to left, it's actually right? And when I go to the left, do I go leftwards or back or forward? It can be super confusing. But you know what? It's also not really what you should call things, because that's not what they do. That's what they look like. You should consider calling things what they actually do. So the arrows are not really left and right. They're previous and next, or before, after, beginning, end, backwards and forwards. And that also has the benefit of being true for both right to left and left to right. Pop-ups, if you align it towards the edge, well, align edge before, or the start of the edge, or the element, or the beginning of the element, etc., instead of saying left. Same with pop-ups. Backwards, start, beginning, end. Think about things this way, which will make your code and your product a lot more understandable in general, and allow you to support right to left. So in Wikimedia Foundation, I don't know if you can see this, actually. We have a widget library, and we have also pop-ups. Well, our pop-ups also, in the configuration, you can choose the position, above, below, before, and after. So we don't do left and right. And then the alignment, which is the indicator, forwards, backwards, center, and then you do have a force left and a force right if you know that what you want is actually force left regardless of directionalities. And this allows anyone that uses our stack, including users that create plugins, that create user scripts, whatever, to really know to support right to left immediately without even thinking about it. So they don't even need to do anything. We just do it for them. Here's another example for toolbars. So this is the toolbar in left to right and right to left. Well, we can see here's a link. It's flipped. Here's the bullet list. It's flipped. We actually are arguing about whether or not it should be flipped, but that's a different issue. And here's wait a minute. That's supposed to be flipped, no? Well, is it? Let's think about this for a minute. Let's think about it. All right. So this is undo and redo, and I want my undo to be first and my redo to be second. Well, in left to right, what does it mean to undo? I go backwards. Backwards is towards the left. All right, that works. Well, what does it mean to redo? Redo is forward. It's towards the right. Well, that works. OK, I have undo and redo. Well, what is it in right to left? Well, when you undo in right to left, you go backwards towards the right, and when you redo, you go towards the left. So really what happened here is that you absolutely flipped it twice. So as you can see, things are not always as straightforward as you would think. And here's another example of something done a little bit differently. So this is LibreOffice, and this is the bullet toolbar. And this is in left to right. And then if you switch your direction to right to left, this is what happens. It's just mirrored. And the developers just mirrored everything, which seems to be great, except this part here, which is not really helpful. not really working. And when I did this at the foundation, I was told, you should show how we do it. So here's how we do it. This is left to right and right to left. And as you can see, we have our own right to left icon. And it actually makes sense. So I will also show you how you can do that fairly easily without much coding around it so that it switches for you without blindly switching everything. So when it comes to interface and code actions, think about your action and what they actually mean. Don't go by the literal action. Go by its purpose. Did you really mean to go left, or did you mean to go to the beginning, or go backwards, right? Consider the real meaning of your icons. Do you need to flip them? Do you not? What do they do? Is this like an interface action? Is this a user action? What does it do? And if you already flipped them, please flip them properly. So thinking about these things can really clarify the UI for your users. It's not just for right-to-left support. Of course, you should be supporting right-to-left, and I will keep saying that, but it's not just for that. It will clarify the UI. It will clarify also the work for the coders, for the developers, for everybody. All right, here's another example, numbers and non-numbers. So let's say your application is asking for a phone number. This is what it looks like in left-right, and this is what it looks like in right-to-left. As we said, for the most part, languages, numbers are rendered left to right. So, other than alignment, it looks pretty OK, right? Sure, except what happens if you want to add, international number, like +1 or whatever it is? That's how it looks like in a right-to-left aligned input. Why? Because the plus is a weak entity, and the entire input is right to left. So it thinks, oh, I'm weak. I'm impacted by my old context. I'm staying to the right. And numbers are also weak, so they don't affect the direction at all. So the plus stays on the right. That is very confusing and can create a lot of issues. Now, remember that sometimes you don't even control that. Some operating systems will just turn that input for you to right to left, or to the direction of your operating system. So in these cases, my recommendation is to force, like if you know that you have numbers and the numbers are Latin, and you know that you need a phone number or whatever it is, then you know that it's left to right, and then force it left to right, or find another solution to represent internationalization. But be aware that these things happen. And as they happen, these things also happen. Now remember, I told you that weak entities, listen to the general context, and we saw the incident of the period. Well, period is not the only weak entity. Here's what happens. This is my username on Wikipedia. This is what happens when I log into the Hebrew Wikipedia. Now, to be fair, and I'm going to have to say that because this video is going to be online and people who work very hard on the bidirectional algorithm is probably going to see it, this actually has been fixed in the bidirectional algorithm. The problem is that browsers, not all of them, have implemented that fix. So as far as we're concerned, it's not yet fixed. So here's what happens the other way. Let's say I created my username in Hebrew, and now I'm using it in English Wikipedia or whatever. The same thing happens on the top there. So really watch out for misleading characters. Read the Unicode bidirectional algorithm. Watch out for parentheses, plus, minus, comma, periods, all those kind of things that we think are so awesome and then can break our stuff. And be aware where the OS or the environment can change context for you. There are a couple of apps, native Android or iOS apps, that had problems having people register because of those things. So let's talk about interface versus content. So here's a quick example. This is, again, LibreOffice, and I installed it twice, once in English and once in Hebrew. So I don't know if you can see that a little bit, but the interface itself, even though the content I wrote like in Hebrew or English, at the top, the interface is English. You have the tabs normal, outline, notes, etc., all aligned from the ref. Even though I wrote in the slide in Hebrew. And then on the bottom, you have the same thing, except it's aligned to the right. It's a right-to-left interface. I installed it in Hebrew. And all the tabs are just right-aligned, written in Hebrew, even though in the middle I wrote in English. So this is a concept that is known for applications, right? The separation between content and interface. And in Wikipedia, we also do that. So let's say I work on the Spanish Wikipedia, and I want to help out, and I want to, work. But you know what? My Spanish is good, but it's not good enough to really remember the technical terms of the, settings and stuff like that. So what I can do is I can work in the Spanish Wikipedia, but I can switch my interface language to English. So all the content remained the same. It's still the Spanish Wikipedia, but my sidebar and the top bar and everything, and all the notifications that I'm getting, all the notices, is all now English. So it's easier for me to work. That's great, but what happens if I want to do the same thing with right to left and left to right? And you can imagine where this is going. So this is the Hebrew Wikipedia, and this is the Hebrew Wikipedia with English interface. So you can already see that things are flipping, but not entirely. So this is the content. The content remained the same. We're still in the Hebrew Wikipedia. But all of the interface flipped, just like we saw between the two wikis, right? English and Hebrew. OK, here's another kind of like, digging deeper into the interface. Both of those are from Hebrew Wikipedia. The right one is just regular RTL interface. The left one is when I look at it with an English interface. So this flipped. OK, that makes sense. From the right, from the left, that's great. This one happens when I start searching, though. So OK, I get a little drop-down with recommendations for my search. But actually, does it need to switch? I mean, if I'm searching the Hebrew Wikipedia, I'm probably searching in Hebrew. So is that interface or is that content? I don't know. We're arguing about that. But the point is, it's not always as clear. So you need to really think about your product's pieces properly. You need to consider, is it content? Is it interface? If it is content, isolate it from the interface as much as you can. And then, are your actions content-dependent or are they interface-driven? These are things that are really useful to consider regardless of supporting right to left, but even more so when you support right to left and languages in general. This is a small example. I just thought it was a little funny. So this is me inviting my friend Rond to join some group whose name is in Hebrew, maximum 2 terms. This is on the web. So this is the notification on the web. And here's the notification on mobile. So now the Hebrew has no spaces in there, and it's backwards, terms to maximum. This is both Facebook. Be consistent, please. I mean, we already have right-to-left issues. If you're already doing your own thing, please be consistent. And using right-to-left can help you figure out where you're not consistent. Also, some systems try to guess what you mean. So Facebook and Google, if you start typing, they will count the number of words in either language and then figure out if they need to align it to the right or align it to the left. Each one of them does it differently, by the way, which is great for users. Never know what you're going to get. But it's inconsistent between web and mobile, which basically means it's useless. Because as you type, you say, oh, it's going to turn for me. But no, wait, does it? No. So if you do that, if you decide to guess, please be consistent. So here's another example about user-generated content. So this is from Wikipedia as well. We have a system for notifications. If you participate in a discussion board, you can get a notice saying, oh, there's a new topic created. But discussion boards, the board name and the topic names are all user-generated. So there's nothing preventing someone from coming in and creating a name for either the board or the topic in Hebrew, for example, or Arabic. Right? So this is what it looks like in English. So you have new topic created on discussion board 1, new topic 2. All right. This is what happens when both the board and the topic are in Hebrew. They're flipped now. So really what it says is new discussion topic created on the topic, and here's the discussion board name. So it's all flipped. And if you look at this, I know it's confusing, but if you think about this for a minute, what I have here is one big string that is all right to left, and inside it there's just punctuation, right? Colon and quotes. So obviously, the bidirectional algorithm says, oh, it's all Hebrew. Whoop! Not helpful. But there is a solution for that. We can use something called isolation. So we know that board name and topic title are 2 things we cannot control. And we don't know what is going to be in there, either directionality or fonts whatever it is. So we can already say, isolate those two things. Just make sure that they are outside of the general break, whatever bidirectional rules you have, these two are isolated from that. And actually, and this isolation is part of the algorithm. The algorithm allows for it, of course. And when you do that, now it actually is correct. So you have new topic created on the board, and here's the topic title. Here's another example. This is what happens with Gmail when you have a flight. So this is, you have your legs, and it notifies you, where your leg to and from and everything. And this is Gmail in Hebrew. So you have Tel Aviv to Istanbul. All right. Well, if it was in English, it would have said Tel Aviv to Istanbul, 28 May 840. In Hebrew, though, we seem to have a little bit of a problem here. The 28 is not really with the date where it should be. And you can probably guess why already, right? The 28 is a number, follows, the alphabet. Great, but not so great. But we can isolate this. We already know, if we are the ones who are building this, Gmail, you already know that you might not control the interface, but you know that the TLV and IST and all of those are always in English. And even if they're not, probably are most of the time. So just isolate them. And if you isolate them, they work. And then you can have your interface separate from your content. So user-generated content is really good idea to always isolate that. You never know what the user types. The user keeps surprising you. Beware of things like comments, username, tagline, things that you wouldn't consider, oh, that's not Costa. Yes, it is. And the users will sometimes try and succeed in inserting really weird stuff in there. If you try to validate, so if you try to say, oh, this is clearly Hebrew, this is clearly Arabic, not so much, because sometimes you have things like numbers, parentheses, you have stop stuff, not very helpful. So be very, very careful. And you don't always control, we come back to that, don't always control the interface direction. So in the example that we saw with Gmail, I mean, they generally control because they programmed the fact that you can make it right to left. But if you would have looked, and I had a couple of examples, if you want, I can show you later, of emails that companies send to other people, and then how they look like in a right-to-left Gmail. It's rendered completely backwards, right? So you don't always control where the user is viewing whatever you send them. So take that into account and try to make sure that things are what you want to do and isolate stuff. So now that I broke your brain and made everybody very sad about the state of things, I will now go into helpful tools, because we do have them. So here's what we are using in the Wikimedia Foundation, and I told you about the icon that is flipping instead of like automatically flipping it. We have a library called CSS Janus. It actually started as a Google project, but then stopped being maintained, and we picked it up. It's available as an NPM module and a PHP library, and what it does really is, it takes CSS rules, like this one, for example, content, float, and flips them for you. And you can tell it, you know what, flip everything except this rule, and then it won't flip that rule. So it's very, very useful. It also works on images, which is how we do, the flipping of the bullets that you saw, or the numbered list. We don't have to, make a system to mirror everything and then go, oh no, what did we do with mirroring? We have icons for left, icons for right, and we have this system, which is super, super useful. It's absolutely open source. Feel free to use it and contribute to it. We also have a thing called Translate Wiki. So this is more general. It does touch on right to left, but it also touches on everything, and I highly recommend it. This system is open source, it's free, and you can use it in your own projects if you conform to kind of the structure that it expects. What it does is that if you do use it in your own project, it allows people to translate with context. So this is what it looks like if you want to translate. You have the original a string, hide minor edits from recent changes. And then you have the translation that the user can insert. But on the right-hand side, you also have an explanation, a context, like where is this going to be? What is it talking about? And as you can see from this message supports the use of gender, whether or not you need to genderify things, which happen a lot in languages outside of English. Speaking of which, it also allows you a very fairly robust way to translate stuff, like using gender, using plural, very complex plural, and then mixing the two together however way you want. So highly recommended, Translate Wiki. Go check it out. This is also the way that we translate all of MediaWiki and all of our Wikimedia stack. If you want to help translate, please feel free. We would always love to have more eyes on that. And this is my website, rtl.wtf. When the new TLDs came out, I was like, of course I'm getting that one. There's also an ltr.wtf. It's the same website, except one of them is aligned right and one of them is aligned left. So feel free to go in there. There's a couple of my lectures in there, and there's a couple of explanations, the history and experimentations with right-to-left craziness, selecting stuff, selecting with your mouse versus selecting with your keyboard. It's great. It's all super consistent, not. To summarize, beware of mixed content inputs. If you have mixed contents, you need to really watch out. Maybe split them apart. Think about where elements are placed through your interface. Does it go to the right? Does it go to the left? Do you need it in the beginning of something? And thinking about what things should look like can help you clarify the UI, as we mentioned. Clearly separate content from interface. It's not that easy, so spend the time to think about which part is what in your product, and why does it matter, and what is the user expected or expecting to see when they interact with it. Please be consistent across platforms. As it is, right-to-left users don't expect much online. It's really confusing when they learn the behavior in one platform and then they go to another platform that's completely different. Make sure all user-generated content is isolated, and actually not just user-generated content, even things that you know is going to be interface versus things that you already know in advance, like in the Gmail example. And please support internationalization, and please support right-to-left. It's super, super important. So I do know that I have 3 minutes. So I was going to just finish here, but I'm going to give you a little bonus. A little bonus about emoticons. Yes, and it starts with a cute animal because your brain is going to melt now. So this is, for the most part, emoticons go fairly, straightforward in left to right, right to left. It goes the same way, except you need to tilt your head, the other way around. So this is smiley, and this is sadly, and all is good in the world, except for these. Especially the bottom one, where my mom would send me, messages, hey, how are you doing? And I would say, I'm at the office, grin. And she would call me hysterical, why are you sobbing? So if you have a product that has these, consider maybe giving people the option for an emoji or something. Now, because this happened, a lot of right-to-left users, instead of typing colon and then D, will type D and then colon. So if your system takes these things and then figures out whether to migrate them into emoji, take that into account. Because yes, the situation is very sobby, apparently. All right, then that's it from me. Thank you very much.